If you've gotten into a few conversations about money, you probably know not everyone agrees on how money should be spent. But in this book, The Psychology of Money, Morgan Housel points out 4 incredibly freeing principles that we're going to dive into in this video. And at the end, we're going to go into how Morgan Housel spends his own money. Hey, my name is Michael Thompson. On this channel, we discuss personal and professional development from a Christian perspective. And the first principle that Morgan Housel discusses is that personal experience shapes financial behavior. And he gives an illustration about someone who grew up when the economy was doing very poorly, and then another person who grew up in the last 20 or 30 years where you can really rely on the economy for investing that's going to grow down the road. And it stuck out to me because there are definitely people I know who they don't want to invest into the market because they have an experience that has really influenced the way they think. And in the past, I've kind of thought, oh, I don't think that they're correct. But after reading this book, Morgan Housel he made me rethink my perspective because different people use money differently. The way that I think that is the best way to use money isn't necessarily the way someone else could. And then everyone's skill set is different. So all of these factors play into how someone views money. So remember this, no one's crazy. The way that they view money is largely because of their own experience. And there are some incorrect views out there, but at the end of the day, it's not good to constantly be judging other people for how they use money. Now, delayed gratification is important, and it's also important to remember that if you're not careful, you will never have enough. There are so many wealthy people out there who they risk it all and then they end up with zero. And you can read about different guys that are hedge fund managers or different people who are really successful in their fields. And even though they had plenty of finances, that constant need for more caused them to lose it all. So no matter how much money you have, it's important to remember that one of the most effective things you can do when it comes to handling your money is have enough. And what is enough? Well, no one really agrees on that, but enough, from my perspective as a Christian, is God's taking care of my needs. Well, if you really boil down what your needs are, then you realize, okay, a lot of people, they want the nice car or the house or these different other things, but it's not necessarily a need. So remember that. Not very many people have enough, and that's one of the most effective things that you can do in managing your own money. Another principle to remember is that the highest form of financial achievement, in Morgan Housel's perspective, is getting the goalpost stopped. Well, what does that mean? Well, a lot of people, as they make more money, they just upgrade their lifestyle. And this is called lifestyle creep in other books, but when you get a promotion and you go out and buy a new car right away, you are allowing your lifestyle to just increase as your money increases. Every time you get a bigger paycheck, if you go out and then you eat out more, or you just change the restaurants or the vacations you go on. And what happens a lot of times is as people make more money, they just spend more, and they're not able to allow that more money to give them freedom in their life to either work this job or that job, because they become a slave to their own palate. They have a high palate in what they expect and what they are used to spending money on. And then the funny thing is, in my experience, as I have bought nicer things, I didn't appreciate them more. And it's this whole funny idea that you try to make more money just so that you can have nicer things that down the road you're not really going to appreciate anyways. And one of the themes on this channel is that the people in your life are one of the most important things that you can invest in, and you should never chase money at the expense of relationships. And this book continuously circles around having the freedom to make your choices is one of the highest forms of wealth. So if personal experience influences the way someone views finances, we shouldn't judge other people for different money decisions. You should manage your own finances well, and then if someone asks you, you should definitely give them advice and point things out. But remember, if somebody puts a whole bunch of money away in the wall somewhere in their house because they think that that's the best way to save, them not understanding the way that accounts grow is probably heavily influenced by their personal experience, and that's different than yours. So just remember that. As people make different decisions with money, don't judge them. Just let them make their decisions, and then you make your decisions. And if someone asks you, definitely explain things to them. But at the end of the day, much of how someone views their finances is through personal experience. The second major principle that Morgan Housel develops is how individual behavior affects financial outcomes. He says that the highest form of money, the highest form of wealth is control over your time. Being able to wake up and say, I'm going to do what I want with my day. Now, that I would nuance that a little bit, because not every job has you decide what you do with your day. Not every job gives you that ability. If you're a doctor or I'm a pastor, there are elements of my schedule that I'm not able to control. And if someone's in need, I'm going to go and I'm going to help that person. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that I have control over everything I do in my day. But if you manage your time, you manage your finances wisely, down the road, you're going to be able to say, you know what? I can choose what I want to do with my day, because it's not the money that's making me get up in the morning and that's making me work, because you have managed that wisely. Now, this is all assuming that the economy is good, right? Like in a communist country where you're not able to go out and make more money, and the factors are very different, that person, again, it goes back to personal experience. That person will view my view of money as completely different. And so it's good to remember that personal experience as you discuss all these different principles. But U.S. citizens, that's the richest country in the world, and the way that they buy houses even changes how often they have to work. And you can see this based on the square footage size of houses that were bought in 1950 versus in 2018. In 1950, the average square foot of a house was 983 square feet. In 2018, that moved up to 2,436 square feet. What does that prove? That our palate has increased. So having to pay for these bigger houses and pay for all this nicer stuff it tends to chain the person to a job that makes more money. And that making more money could be owning a business where your time isn't demanded, but it also could be that you're now having to work a job and your spouse is having to work a job to keep up with this lifestyle. And maybe you're trying to impress people down the street, and all these different factors completely change how money is, whether you are tied down by it or whether you are freed by the way that you handle money. So keeping money at the end of the day is a huge key to being able to decide what you want to do with your day. You have to be able to save money. And past a certain income, people tend to fall into three different groups. Those three groups are those that save, those that don't think that they need to save, and those that think they need to save, but they don't. And each one of these groups, at the end of the day, it comes down to money it's more of a psychology than it is a finance. Past a certain level of income, all you need to live, what covers your needs, is what sits just below your ego. And when Morgan Housel was talking about that in the book, it really resonated with me, because I've seen so many people, they have to keep up with a certain lifestyle, they have to impress certain people, and so that causes them to make certain decisions or take out certain loans in a season of life where they have no business doing that. And then everything on the work side of things has to be maintained and increased in order to make up for all these other decisions they're making. So if you understand how to stop the goalpost, like we mentioned earlier, what it costs you to live, if it costs you $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month to live, don't let that just increase. And in order to do that, you really have to maintain your expenses. You have to have some kind of if you don't like the word budget, a plan for spending, whatever. You have to know how much you're spending. And then as you get promotions, as more money comes in, you don't need to increase that goalpost. I've heard some people say that if you just get a nicer job and you make more money, all that affects is the kind of house you live in, the kind of car you drive, and the vacations you take. And then, I suppose maybe where you go out to eat. The point is, make sure that you remember that individual behavior affects financial outcomes. And if you stop the goalpost, you say, this is what it costs me to live, I'm not going past that, and you watch the way that you spend the money, eventually down the road, you're going to be able to be the one who makes the decisions with your time, and you're going to have so much more of an option how you spend your time, because you're not doing everything in your work, or you're not taking jobs or leaving jobs strictly based on money. The third major principle is that culture, history, and people's goals all shape their financial decisions. Can you weather a 30% decrease to your assets? That question is brought up in this chapter. And Morgan Housel says at the end of the day, you need to make sure that you have room for error in your finances. If things don't go exactly how you think they will in the future, are you going to be able to make it out all right? He says that market volatility should be expected. And he says, I like how he says this, he says that market volatility, it's a fee, it's not a fine. So if you're going to invest, you're going to open your account at some point, and it's going to be down a certain percentage. And as you go on down the road, the more thousands you put in there, the more that can really make your stomach drop when you see that it's down. But at the end of the day, you got to expect that when you're investing. And then different people have different goals. Few things matter more with money than understanding that your own time horizon affects what you're going to invest in, and it affects how you spend your money. If someone's going to retire in 10 years and then they haven't saved any money, they're going to be saving, hopefully, a lot of money, a lot of percentage of their paycheck. But if somebody is 20 years old and they just get into investing, they just start putting money aside into an IRA account or some kind of account where they can invest into different stocks, if that person at 20 years old starts putting money in, they don't have to put in 50% of their paycheck like someone would have to if they're going to retire in 10 years. So remember that. Everyone comes, they come to their investments, they come to their spending with different goals. And if your goal isn't to be a multimillionaire and have tons of money, then you're not going to have to save like someone who does have that as their goal. And something else to think about is at the end of the day, it's all about your values. If you're someone who really wants to be seen as wealthy by other people, well, that value, I'm not even saying whether that's right or wrong. Personally, I have my own opinion on that, but whether that's right or wrong, how you're going to achieve that goal is very different than somebody who doesn't necessarily have the desire to have a lot of wealth. So either way, at the end of the day, remember this: history, culture, and people's personal goals all changes how they handle their own money. The fourth major principle is how Morgan Housel himself invests his own money. He says that at the end of the day, there are two topics that whether you like it or not, they affect how you live. And I've continuously thought about this since I read it in the book: your money and your health. No matter who you are, where you live, what you want out of life, money and health affect you. And so these things are very important to, especially as a Christian, to handle them in a way that honors God and doesn't put you in a bad spot. Because if you're not careful, especially as a pastor, I could get overweight and I could be in a spot down the road where I'm not able to be effective in my ministry to other people because I haven't managed myself. Same with finances. If you get yourself in a bunch of debt or you over leverage yourself, say it was good debt, but you over leveraged, and then the bank comes calling, hey, things are down, we need that money back, and you don't have it. Well, that doesn't represent a Christian well. So all of these different factors, when it comes to your money and your health, they're so important to manage well. So here's what Morgan Housel does. He says that he views wealth as a way to have control over his time. True success financially is exiting the rat race. And I've got some friends that have talked a lot about that. They lived in the cubicle life and they're like, man, we don't like this. We want to work for ourselves. And it was a big jump. But whenever they jumped out of that kind of a work style, they really enjoyed the freedom that gave them in life. But that's not everybody. Not everyone, and again, it goes back to your personal experience, your personal goals. But Morgan Housel says true wealth is being able to control your time. The second thing he says, he owns his house outright. Technically, it wasn't a good financial decision. He mentioned that he had a really good rate on his loan that he got from the bank. And a lot of people would look at that and say, oh, don't pay that off early because it's a great loan. You're not paying that much back to the bank. But he said what it does for him sleeping well at night made it worth paying off his home. I've heard another guy say that his personal residence is not an investment property. So the way that he pays that off, even though he could not pay it off, he chose to because he said it helps him sleep well. That's another friend that I have. So he owns his house outright. That's what Morgan Housel does. Here's the third thing he does. He keeps 20% of his assets in cash. I was shocked when I heard that. 20% of your assets, and I think he's like in his 40s or 50s. So if he's been saving for a while, that's a lot of money in cash. And a lot of investors would say that, man, that much cash, it can grow like crazy if it's put in the market. But Morgan Housel says if a market downturn happened, he is still sleeping well at night. And that would also fall in line with the Dondo investing video I did on here a little while ago, because when you wait for the market to crash, then everything's on sale. If you keep 20% of your assets in cash, if the market does crash, man, you can really get in on some good deals. The fourth thing that Morgan Housel does with his money is he plans for the unexpected. He says everyone in life goes through a huge expense when they did not expect to have that expense. Now that is so good. I've heard that from other people, that different variables, like the market changes and they bought some on margin, so that changes how their finances work out, or they have a kid, or they have a car or a house. Something with one of those parts of life changes, and then the unexpected is here. Or, you have a job and then you lose the job. All these different things should be planned out when you think of how you spend your money. And when I read that in the book, I was like, yeah, there's definitely some things I could change with how I do my finances based on that principle that there will be an unexpected expense that comes up. Happens to everybody. And if you're planning your finances now, it's good to think about that. Here's the last thing that Morgan Housel does with his finances. He said that his goal is independence, not a number. And again, this could be different for different people. If you want $3 million in your account so you can retire, then your goal is different. But he says it's not a number. He said no matter what he saves or invests, he will always have the goal of independence and to have the opportunity to choose to do whatever he wants to and what will help him sleep well at night. And that's pretty cool philosophy because this guy, he knows what money does. He's really looked into money, how it works. And some people will say that you have to have this much, you have to do this, you have to spend this much or save this much. But at the end of the day, it is a personal value decision how you spend your money. So I agree with him that we should really focus on managing our finances well. And it's a really consistent way to manage your money to focus on what you spend. And it's harder to really focus on the income. And what I mean by that is if you start tomorrow, you can control how much it costs you to live. You can control your expenses pretty much instantly. But to increase your income, if you own your own business, it might be a little easier, but usually that takes a longer time. So start today, stop the goalpost, say this is what it costs me to live, stick to it, make sure that you have a plan for how you spend your money, and then remember that the goal, the purpose of money is a tool. It's not the end goal to have millions of dollars in your account. From my perspective. That could be someone else's goal, but in the meantime, I'd much rather make sure that I have my needs taken care of, not buy a house that's too big, not be house poor, not have all these expenses that change how I am with my family. The goal is, hey, have money, manage it wisely, and as a Christian, God expects us to manage the things that He gives us well. For me, that means being a giving person. So I want to manage my money wisely. I want to make sure that I stop my expenses at a certain point. And as you add life situations, that'll change. But knowing what I'm spending, and at the end of the day, letting money be a tool so that I can have the freedom to do what I want to do throughout my life. Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. This is a book review on The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. And if you want to invest your money and grow it, watch this other video I did. It's a book review of The Dondo Investor by Manish Babrai. Teach you how to invest your money. See you guys in the next one.